So this morning we have a very powerful parable for us to look at and see what the fathers have to say about this very powerful and intensive parable. And it's about life, and it's about death, and it's about how we live in life and how we live in death. So we have these two men. We have first a man who is not named by name. He's just called the rich man. And then the other is a man named Lazarus in this parable. You can't help but think that the Lord must be thinking of his friend Lazarus, who would die very soon, and he would be raised from the dead by the Lord. If you recall that story right before Holy Pascha. And here we have another man named Lazarus in a special parable. He could have been named anything, but I think his name Lazarus is significant. Because as Jesus says, just at this end of the parable, right, speaking about Abraham, saying that even if someone rises from the dead and goes and tells the truth to them, they will not listen. And he, of course, says to them that you have Moses and the prophets. Let them teach you. This is how all of us must be taught, really. The heart of hearts, we must be taught by the prophecies of God, how he teaches us and how he leads us. But the irony is that the prophecies all tell us about one who rises from the dead, one who goes to the Father and takes people with him. So here we have this story. Let's look at it a little bit closer and see what the fathers have to say. So it says that this rich man was clothed in purple and he ate very well. It says he ate sumptuously, which means he had all kinds of really good food all the time. It says every day he ate like this. It tells us one thing. You know how it is. If you have a really rich meal, but you eat rich meals all the time, you get sick. You don't feel good. This is not a man that fasted. It's not a man that did without. He always had what he wanted and what he needed. There was a certain beggar named Lazarus, and he, it says, was the opposite. He was full of sores. He had things all over his body that made him feel very painful. And he actually was laid at this rich man's gate. And he was just desiring to get something from the rich man, some crumbs from his table, at the least, and he would be happy. But the dogs would come and lick his sores, it says. So it was then the beggar died and the rich man died at the same time. Interesting. So the rich man, being in torment, it says, in Hades, lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham far off, and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus that he may dip the tip of his finger in water, and cool my tongue from torment in this flame. Seems as though the rich man hasn't really learned anything, has he? He still wants the beggar to come to him and help him in his time of need. He wants this man who was out of the gate to come and help him now, when before he didn't even give him the time of day. But he's treating him like a servant. But Abraham says to him, Son, remember that in your lifetime you already received your good things. All your luxuries, all your fine clothes, all your sumptuous food, all your easy living. But Lazarus likewise received evil things. Now the Lord in this parable compares the two and shows how one is living a life of torment and one is living a life with God. And he said, besides that, there's a great gulf that's been fixed between us that doesn't allow us to come to you or you to come to us. And the fathers have interpreted this gulf in many different ways. But it is clearly a separation between us, or between heaven and hell, you might say, or between where God is and where God is not from these people's perspective. But as we know, this brings up the whole issue of heaven and hell, right? The Orthodox, we do not believe that there is an actual place of hell, but more so that this man has placed himself away from God. That is the gulf that is fixed between them. His desire for his own things. And then it goes on, because the man doesn't give up there, the man in Hades, the rich man. He says, I beg you therefore, Father, that you would send him to my father's house. For I have 5 brothers, that he may testify to them, lest they come to this place of torment. And again, he still wants Lazarus to be his servant and go and tell his brothers about what's wrong. But here Abraham, through the Lord's parable, teaches Moses and the prophets, and even someone rising from the dead will not change the mind of someone who's already made up their mind. So the question that we must ask ourselves is, have we made up our minds? Are we open to the things of God? St. John Chrysostom says this about this parable. Do you see how by the place, by the things that waste there, he draws men off from this desire that is here, and rivets them to heaven, where all things are impregnable? For if you transfer your wealth there, where neither rust or moth corrupts, nor thieves break through and steal, you will both expel this disease and establish your soul in the greatest abundance. He also brings forward an example to teach you moderation. Like a physician wanting to alarm sick men, he brings in the rich man, laboring indeed and longing for life and health, but not able to attain these. Having set his heart on covetousness, he goes away empty. How then is it possible for the rich man to be saved? And this is the important point that I think St. John makes here, that is the application for this for us today. By possessing his goods in common with those who are in need, being such as Job was, and exterminating out of his soul the desire for more, and in no areas going beyond real need. So let's reflect on that for a moment. Possessing his goods in common with those who are in need. In other words, when we see others that have a need, we should help them if we can. We should take from our abundance and apply it to someone else. And I think if the rich man would have just simply taken care of the beggars in the front of his gate, making sure that they had a meal every day, and maybe just a place and something over their heads while they laid in front of his gate, then that perhaps would have been enough for the rich man to be drawn to heaven. But instead, he turns his eye from that, and as the fathers tell us, he only is looking on himself and the things that he has, rather than looking around him. He must have, as the Lord is saying, as St. John is saying here, he saw Job as something very important, that Job was willing to let go all that he had and realize that everything that he had was God's anyway. But he says, and exterminating out of his soul the desire for more, and in no areas going beyond real need. And this is something that we also should seek after all the time, which is not to just go and run after the things that you just want, but the things that you actually need. And then what you'll find is that God will give you abundance. And then that abundance that he gives you as a result can be shared with others. So that somebody can understand and perhaps get a little bit out of their heartache and their pain. And this again is because we're looking to others around us, as this rich man was not. And so then I want to just read a little section from St. Cyril of Alexandria, from his commentary on St. Luke. Make for yourselves friends of the unrighteous mammon, he says. That is, do not consider your riches as belonging to yourselves alone. Open wide your hand to those who are in need. Assist those in poverty and pain. Comfort those who have fallen into extreme distress. Console with those who are in sorrow or oppressed with bodily maladies. And the necessities, and also comfort the saints who embrace a voluntary poverty, so that they may serve God without distraction. Nor will your doing so will be unrewarded. For when your earthly wealth abandons you, as you reach the end of your life, then they will make you partakers of their hope and of the consolation given to them by God. For being good and kind to man, he will lovingly and bountifully refresh those who have labored in this world, and more especially such as have wisely and humbly and soberly borne the heavy burden of poverty. You know, I reflected some years ago on our Metropolitan Jonah at the time, who had vowed when he first became a Metropolitan that he vowed a vow of poverty, that he would not own anything himself. And so what this calls for then is for others who do have to care for him. Right? By implication, as the leader who has claimed voluntary poverty, he has to be cared for by those around. Right? And this is how we have to change our thinking. How can we care for one another? How can we love one another? How can we get our eyes off of the world and all of its stuff and all of its things and all of its insecurities and securities and everything it has? And how can we let go of that and offer to God everything that we have? And you might say to yourself, Father, well, none of us here are rich. You know, none of us here are sumptuously eating every day and living lavishly. And that's true. I encourage you to read the article in the bulletin by Father Stephen Freeman, who speaks about the middle class and where we stand and all that. You know, we're not really super wealthy, but we're also not poor either, right? We're not starving. We have food on our table. We're not laying by the gate of someone. So where do we fit into this? And I think it's a spiritual attitude and an attitude of the heart. And because even as someone who lives in the middle class, you can be attracted to things and stuff. Matter of fact, many of you, if we go to your houses and we look at your garages or your storage rooms, we might see them full of things, right? That maybe you don't even need. But the point being is that we all have to apply to ourselves where we can help those around us and be sensitive to the needs of those who are poor, not just even physically, but those who are poor spiritually, those who are poor in need of emotional connection, those who are in need of physical touch, those who are in need of just someone to look at them and listen to them. We have so many needs on those levels that if we could just begin there in our lives, we will see our lives transforming. We'll see our lives becoming accepted like Lazarus' life, who was meek and impoverished and willing to accept what was low. And so instead of being fearful and frightened about those who are poor or those who don't have, we should be accepting and willing to open our hearts and minds to them. This is our lesson today, brothers and sisters. Pray that St. John Chrysostom and St. Cyril of Alexandria will teach us and give us some lessons to ponder upon today. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Glory to Jesus Christ.
Glory be forever.